meant to be people first, really. If you have a great statistic, it doesn't really matter unless you've got someone who can exemplify this in some way. I was in a position, I was single, hadn't really put my roots down yet, so I was in a place where if someone said to me, do you want to go to Timbuktu, I would have been like, yeah. What makes you as a journalist, what's ever going to set you apart from anyone else is the content and what you're coming up with and what you're...
Welcome to How to Be a Journalist, a podcast by News Associates. I'm Plamedi Mbungu, and thank you very much for tuning in. I'm a recent university graduate, and I work at News Associates. I'm early in my career, and I need the wisdom from more experienced journalists. So to solve this problem, in every episode, I will dive into conversations with some of the most dedicated and talented journalists from all corners of our industry, asking questions about their careers, successes, and giving you a different view of the person behind the byline. Whether you're an aspiring journalist, a seasoned figure in the newsroom, or just interested in knowing what happens behind the scenes, you're in the right place. Today's guest is BBC London reporter and producer Adriana Elgueta. Before landing her role at BBC London, Adriana worked for local publication The Romford Recorder and Ilford Recorder, and spent 6 months working for The Sun. Before that point, she trained at the PA Media Academy on their fast track course, picking up her NCTJ diploma. She's worked as a producer on The One Show, Morning Live, and Rip Off Britain, and whilst at the University of Manchester, she completed her dissertation on Afro-Cuban religion, music, and identity. But what better way to understand Adriana more than hearing from herself? So, welcome to the How to Be a Journalist podcast. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely no problem at all. So, before we get into your current role at the BBC, can I ask you, and could get personal, the reason why you became a journalist in the first place?
I think for me, I kind of actually tried to fight it a little bit because both my parents are journalists. And when I was sort of 18 or in my early 20s trying to decide what to do, I wanted to do something that was, I would guess it could say like a rebellious streak. I didn't want to just do what my parents did. But I felt myself just gravitate towards it just because of my interests. Like I was just naturally interested in people and stories. And I always had been, and creative pursuits of any kind. So it just felt like the perfect marriage between like people and like creative, like a way of telling stories about people in a creative way. Like that just seemed like the obvious thing to do. So I have always kind of felt like I just fell into it because there was nothing else I could do or that I would be happy doing.
No, yeah. Of course. And how did you go about like first getting like experience as a journalist, like post uni? Because that beginning like part of time where you're trying to get bylines can be quite tough. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, I fully agree that those first early years are the toughest because, you know, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know where to start. I think it's that feeling of like, I don't know where to start. Yeah. And also because I remember some people have said to me before, like, oh, I really wanted to be a journalist, but I just didn't know what to write about. And I fully get that. And that's something that I think stays with every journalist forever. Like sometimes you just don't know what to write about, right?
My next question is, what would you say to a person that is just starting out right now as a tale of caution?
Often, at the beginning, a lot of jobs are freelance. An opportunity here, an opportunity there, to do a few shifts here, a few shifts there. Take them 100%. Like, most people get into the BBC because they start freelance. Yeah. You know, there's an opportunity to be part of a pooling thing for, I don't know, Politics Live, let's say. That means they might call you in 3 months' time and say, can you do a shift on Sunday? Do it. In the BBC, what seems to be about 80% of all the jobs that are advertised are actually internal. And that's for people who are staff and for people who are freelance. So you get a huge wealth of opportunity, for example, at the BBC by doing freelance stuff. Like, more often than not, stuff like permanent roles come up because you've done freelance work and, you know, and it can take a lot of time. I was lucky that my first job at the BBC was permanent, but I have colleagues who worked for 4 years freelance. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to pay your rent. It's just a bit more unstable. You will still be working full time. You'll still get the same money. If anything, you'll get more money because your freelance is a higher rate. Yeah. But like, don't be put off by the fact that it's not a full-time role. Like, you will get your stability, but it just takes a while.
Yeah, with time.
And this is the thing, going back to what you were saying as well about like the state of the industry. Yeah, there isn't a lot of funding for things. People want you to be a cog in the machine. They want you to keep things running. I want to say this in the most truthful way that I can. Obviously, I struggle sometimes with this as well. But like, don't be put off by the fact that, you know, sometimes the job is boring. Yeah. That's the truth of it. Sometimes it's boring. Yeah. You've got to do things that you don't want to do. You've got to be that cog. But persistence is key. Persistence is key. Most people won't be persistent as you. You know, if you keep on the same consistency for 3-4 years, most people will have dropped out by that point. Let's face it. I applied for the BBC 42 times. Like, that's 42 times. I actually didn't know that if you could just start freelance and you could probably get a job that way. I know that now because that's how most people get into the BBC. But from the beginning of my career in 2017 to now, I had 42 applications, and the only 2 I've ever had an interview for was the one I currently have. And my first application, I was days after my last exam at uni. It was for a researcher role at BBC Three. And I did the interview and I was just like, I know that if I just give me a few more interviews, I would be better at this, but I wasn't at the time. But if you want something that much, you will get it. Like, you will. If you're persistent more than everyone else, like, you will. And the job that I have at the moment actually was my dream job for so long. I emailed like so many people in the department to be like, hey, can I do this? Can I do this? And I didn't actually get in that way at all. But like, and what the great thing is actually, is that it was actually everything that I had hoped for, in the sense that like I really wanted to work in London news, but I wanted to be able to do it on a big platform and do it across 3 platforms like radio, online and TV, because I really wanted those skills and I really wanted to have that creativity. And, you know, I didn't really think, I suppose, when I was in local news that would ever be something that I was actually going to get to. But yeah, it happens. Okay, and it actually happens sometimes at the worst moment. Like, I was living in Manchester at the time and I was really ready to stay there, and I kind of wanted to settle down a bit and maybe buy a flat in Manchester. Like, I was fully ready. And then I applied for 2 jobs. One was a similar role at BBC Northwest and one was BBC London. It was almost the same role. And I got the London one, even though I was actually hoping for the Manchester one because I was like, this is easier. But my knowledge was so much deeper of London. Like, it was obvious that like this is somewhere that I really cared about as well. And the timing wasn't right. But then the timing is never right. And that's another thing. Like, it kind of goes back to what we were saying about opportunities. Like, the timing is never going to be right. If you say no to a job because you say that the timing's not right, you're doing yourself down. The other thing is that I think when you're starting out is that you have to be prepared to go freelance. It's actually very hard to get a permanent contract in journalism often, and you've got to be prepared to just throw yourself in the deep end and be like, I'm just going to do it. Sometimes it's good to have like actually like another job on the side, or start off like, actually my first job ever wasn't a journalism job. My first job was a production assistant for Saatchi & Saatchi, which is a big advertising company, and I did that for the first 9 months out of uni, and that was just literally so I could like pay off my overdraft, and then like think about like how I could start doing things. And at that time, I guess I was pitching to like little publications and doing little bits here and there, but like I didn't know what I was doing at all. Like, yeah.
And what would you say like the lessons that you learned like in that period of time of your life, that have like stuck with you throughout your entire career?
Just be persistent and follow your gut, I think. When I got my first role in journalism, and it was because I was working for a big advertising company. I was actually on a pretty good wage, even for now standards, and I was offered to do a traineeship with a local paper, and it was literally almost half my salary. I was really like, for me that was quite like a pinnacle moment, because I was like, this is really what I want. I know that I want this. I know that this is going to put me on the trajectory, but I'm going to be suffering and like sacrificing so much. And at the time I was living in a share flat with all of my close friends in Stoke Newington, which is like nice and bougie, comfortable. Of course, and thankfully actually our rent, like our contract was coming up to the end, so I was like, I'm gonna have to move out, and I went to move in like this tiny flat in Barking that with like a Lithuanian cleaner and her boyfriend who was an Indian builder. None of them spoke English. Like, it was a really dodgy area. There were like huge fights outside my window every day. I would walk into crime scenes. I lived right next to like a red light district. Yeah, of course. But it was a huge sacrifice. And I was like, I know that I'm going to be suffering for a while, and it's going to take a long time before I see the benefit of this. But like, I was just like, well, there's nothing else for me. Like, this is the only thing. And it took a long time. Like, I applied for so many jobs for so many local newspapers. You know, I really wanted to do my sort of local news experience at home where I'm from, because I could live with my parents and I wouldn't have to pay London rent and all of these things. But you just have to take the opportunity where it comes. And actually, that's the other thing I want to add, that I think in those early stages, like maybe the opportunity isn't quite what you wanted, like maybe the timing isn't right, you're doing something else. You have to take it. I think you have to take every opportunity that comes your way. Doesn't matter if it's not perfect, doesn't matter if it's gonna like, you know, mess up your life a bit for a while, like that's the only way. And also just see the bigger picture, like, you know, try and think about where this could lead you in like 3-4 years time, kind of thing.
And when it comes to even the mental like part of that, you're on a decent paying job, and then you're like okay, this is what I want to do, so I'm just going to shelve this just for a little bit to do that. Like, how do you endeavor to stay persistent in that difficult time?
Like I say, Jake, you just got to accept that that's your fate for what. I mean, it definitely helps doing it in like when you're younger. And, you know, like I was relatively new out of uni, so like I wasn't used to like a cushy style of life or anything. Like I was in a position, I was single, hadn't really put my roots down yet. So I was in a place where if someone said to me, do you want to go to Timbuktu? I would have been like, yeah, okay. So that definitely helps. So just having that open mind and like that, like, and also you've got to want to do the job, I suppose. Like you've got to be really interested. And I was like, whenever I remember this time and I tell it to people, like this really weird time that I was living in this crazy flat in Barking and working at the local paper, like I actually had an amazing time. Like, I was so engaged and like enthralled with everything that I was doing. I loved all the stories. I kind of loved walking into the crime scenes. Like I felt like, oh, I'm the first one here. Like I just loved the environment so much and the people. Like I just knew that was where I wanted to be. And because I was having such a good time doing this job, I actually don't remember it with any like sourness. If anything, it was fun, really fun time in my life.
And okay, walk me through how like that took you to like taking a course at the PA Media Academy. Like when did that become on the cards for you?
So I did an apprenticeship actually. So it was I applied for a job. I think it was as a reporter, or no, it was a community reporter with Archant, which is now known as Newsquest, for their North London papers. And as part of this, it was like a scheme that was kind of sponsored by Facebook or something like that. Anyway, they got back to me and said, sorry, like, you're not the right candidate, but we thought you were strong, etc. And then they were like, we'll keep you in our books though, because if another traineeship, because I didn't have an NCTJ, bearing in mind. So they said, we'll keep you on our books in case something else comes up. We do apprenticeships where we put people through the NCTJ. And within a couple of months, they came back to me and said, yeah, we have a place on the Rumford Recorder and you will spend a couple of months in the newsroom and then you'll go up to do an NCTJ. And I just wanted to do it quickly and get out of the way. So I did the fast track version and then I went back to work there as I guess like a normal sort of qualified reporter. And then I was there for 2 years, I think.
So you're basically working for, local publications right there. Like, how was your experience working at the local papers and how does it like differ to your time at the nationals?
Yeah, that's a good question actually, because dramatically is the answer. I really loved my local news experience because the patch that I was working in really cared, like the community really cared about their community. Like Rumford is a kind of really weird, strange little place that's almost slightly isolated from, it's not London, well it technically is, but they don't think of themselves as London, but they're not really quite Essex either. The people who live there, their families have lived there for generations. They've not moved. They care about every leaf moving in the community. So we had such a good audience. It's still, even today, like I think when we do our social, like at work at the moment, we do our social listening, a lot of the most read articles that come up in London are always still the Rumford Recorder because they love their community. So, and for that reason, it was really easy to sort of plug in. So I felt like I just became really part of that, and like I was almost kind of like living and breathing it. And it's strange because I don't think I'd heard of this place before I started there. I didn't even know that there was this place. And then like by the end of my time there, like I could name almost every single school. Like I knew like everything about it. I knew, like I just knew the community inside out. Like I knew the nursery schools. I knew like the youth centres, or like the different political factions, the nuances in the councils, or like what's going on with the councillors, like everything. So it was really engaging and really, really fun, and I felt like I was having an impact, and I felt like I could see that. And I felt like people cared about my role as well. Like felt like people came to me with stories. And then I guess in national news, like especially on a very fast-paced, big national paper working online, you just become a cog really. Like they've just got a news kind of agenda that they need to keep working. They need to get out a certain amount of stories every day, and you become part of that cog. And there definitely are some benefits, but like you're not really doing journalism in the same way that you are if you're at a local paper. It feels like part of a production, I think. And I'm sure and I think to get to the point where you are doing real journalism takes a lot longer because you're not given the time to, per se, necessarily. Mm-hmm. And if you do, you've got to fight for it, or you've got to be there a really long time. I mean, there's nothing to say, and I'm sure this remains true for every organisation that you work at. If you have a good idea, there's no one in the room that's going to say to you, no, sorry, don't do that. I need you to write up all of this copy, whatever. Mm-hmm. If you have a good idea, I'm sure that people do. And of course, I did have ideas, and I did try and I made them happy, and I got some really good things on my portfolio at the time. But it was just harder to find that and to also to plug into like, to find something to watch. Like national news is like, where do I begin? Like how do I find a good exclusive? Like what area do I look at? Like what theme do I look at? And that's kind of difficult, I think, when you're thinking about trying to find like a good exclusive, because it's just so like overwhelming. It's like the whole of the UK.
When working at like the local publications, like was there one of those stories at that time that really stuck out to you? Like, okay, I feel like I'm actually like making a difference.
Kind of like there was one story that I did where it was just coming out of the pandemic. Well, sorry, it was early on in the pandemic, and there was a poor girl who was quite young. She must have been about 20, and she had been hospitalized for months with COVID, and her dad actually, bless him, had already passed away. Yeah. And she sort of came out of the hospital and she didn't even know that her dad had passed away. And she did a first interview with me. And it was, at the time, it was like the first interview that not anyone, I couldn't say that for sure, but it was one of the very first interviews that someone had done recounting what it was like inside the hospital at the beginning of the pandemic. And I remember thinking, like I did this and it got picked up everywhere, and, and she ended up on lots of different news channels. And I remember thinking like, oh, this is really impactful, because no one knows what it's like inside these hospitals. And also the place that I was working had a very, very high amount of, because it's like a lot of elderly people live in the area that I covered. So it was one of the hospitals that was most critical as well. So yeah, that was one story that I felt like, okay, this has had an impact.
Did that story in any way like change the way that you looked at like reporting on stories just in general?
I suppose in some senses, because I think it's easy to, and I'm someone who's quite interested in like statistics and like and policy, I think, and I actually, I read a lot of boring articles about like statistics and policy. Yeah. So I think that it made me realise the impact of a human story, I think. And it made me, and this is something that, like in any newsroom as well, it's always meant to be people first, really. If you have a great statistic, it doesn't really matter unless you've got someone who can exemplify this in some way. So I guess it taught me that like whatever story you want to tell, it's about people. It's about how people are affected by this, so make sure that they are the centre of that. So yeah.
It's like those more like personal stories. With your current job and where you work now, like your stories probably get seen by more people, which is obviously fantastic and where like loads of journalists aspire to be at. But like those personal stories, they stick with you.
Well, definitely, and I think that's why, like now, like you can't really almost, especially for TV, online you can get away with it a little bit more, but on TV you can't really run a story unless you don't have a case study. Sometimes I almost find it frustrating, because I'm kind of like, but this isn't this, because sometimes it just really isn't about people. Sometimes it just isn't. Yeah. And so sometimes I feel a bit frustrated, because for example, an example is like, we obviously in London we run so many stories about housing. And a lot of it's sort of different takes on, I don't know, renting, I suppose, renting prices, house prices, all that kind of thing. And we have the amount of case studies that we have run about people who had to move out because they can no longer afford their rent. We almost must have like a whole book of people that are this case study. Yeah. And to the point where I'm like, do we really need them though? Because we've told this so many times. And maybe I think, especially in a TV sense, I think it's more visualization of it.
Yeah, of course.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. And when we were like doing research into you, like we saw on well, I still call it Twitter. I'm not really gonna break that habit, but we saw on Twitter that you were quite like vocal about the COVID pandemic and trying to navigate the journalism industry at that tough time. Like so how did you like get a job during that time, or was it before or after? Like help me put this in the timeline.
Yeah, like, I mean, I had a job. I was lucky that I had a job, and my job wasn't going anywhere. Yeah. And I worked before the pandemic, and we just worked from home. And I must have switched job, I think it was in 21. Yeah. So we were coming out of the pandemic. I don't know, like, I'm not, like, to be honest, I don't have that much experience of that, because I was lucky enough to have a secure job. But I know that a lot of because I guess I finished my NCTJ January of that year, 2020. So there were a lot of people that I worked with that didn't have jobs. Yeah. And I think they had a bit of a tough time because they didn't have any experience and they hadn't managed to get a job before March came around, which must have been really tough. But yeah, I was lucky, I think. Yeah. Because a lot of my friends who were doing like freelance stuff, which like I say is almost the norm when you're starting out.
Yeah.
Well, I say starting out, to be honest, I think a lot of people are freelance for way longer than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they had a lot of their contracts cut or disappeared. Yeah, like even a lot of the bigger papers as well. In fact, I knew someone at PA who was doing a short contract that was ended overnight. A couple of friends who worked at the Standard, same thing, like one day to the next, sorry, like, you know. So yeah, it must have been really tough, but yeah.
It wasn't like your experience, basically, because you were like working at the local publication.
Yeah, it was like on a permanent contract, yeah.
Yeah, of course. And I think that works as a decent segue to your time at... So you worked at The Sun, but you also worked for Ferrari Press Agency as well. So give me the order.
Yeah, like, so the order is, worked at the Rumford Recorder.
Yeah.
Then I started doing a few shifts at The Sun whilst I was still at the Recorder. Then I went full-time to be at The Sun. Whilst I was at The Sun, I was doing, because like I say, it was quite a like cog in the machine job.
Yeah.
I wanted to get out and do more journalism.
Yeah, of course.
And there was a guy, one of the news editors, had worked for a small press agency called Ferrari Press in Greenwich, and he said, "Oh, you should do a day a week." I think he said, "Oh, because I was freelance, so I could kind of work whatever days I wanted."
Yeah.
I was doing a day a week, so I was doing 4 days, I think, at the Sun, and then 1 day at Ferrari Press, and it just meant that I could get out and do things. So it was a lot of like going to the scene of the murder and things like that.
Yeah.
And then it was a really, really small company, so it was just like one director and maybe 3 reporters.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, it was good to get some proper like tutelage, I suppose, that you didn't really have so much at the Sun because it's very busy. So
yeah, of course. I think a question that like even to be fair, like I'm even trying to wonder like what the answer to this one is, and my trainees will ask me like from time to time as well, like how do you go about like getting freelance roles, and like do you have any advice for that, and then how do you survive and pay your rent? That's a roundabout way to ask that question.
Yeah,
but,
I think again it's a really, really important question for sure, because that is one of the things that I'm sure puts off loads of people from going into this industry, and I think that's why you end up with lots of people who come from quite financially stable backgrounds,
of course,
be that their parents or otherwise, or often it's because they live in London and they can live with family, is because they're like, that's what creates like I think maybe a class division in the industry, because it can be, or it can be so daunting because they're, you know, you can't just get a job and that be it and live your happy life. But the answer to the question, I think, is shift work is generally like every news desk will always need people, and more often than not, obviously depends where you are, where you're working, but if it's like a fast-paced news desk, like a big national paper, more often than not, they will be very happy to take on people who just have the energy and the enthusiasm and a small degree of training. So I know the Sun obviously because I worked there, and the Mirror, and all of, to be honest, like all of those, like if you're fresh out of your NCTJ, you email the news editor, you say, "Can I pick up some shifts?" The likelihood is they will say yes. Yeah. They might put you on a few ugly ones to begin with, like a night shift, you know, ones that are less important, but like that is the best way to get experience in a newsroom. And also, to be fair, like often they say, you know, when people complain and say like, "Oh, but I don't do any journalism," and it's like true, you're maybe not doing, like I say, and that's a bit of a pain, but at the same time, what you actually learn by writing copy fast, writing succinctly is pretty key.
Yeah, of course.
Because when you are doing the real journalism, you need to be able to do that, like, instantly, do you know what I mean? Like, if you've got a really good story and you need to write it up, you can't be slaving over it. You need to do it in an hour, potentially. Basically, what I'm saying is I can see why they just put you to, like, be a little writing cog for a while, because it's really valuable, like, you know. I would say that, like, and I'm sure, like, I could do that in my sleep almost, do you know what I mean? It's so second nature because I do it every day. I do think that's a really valuable part of training. But yeah, like if you email, you know, the Sun, the Independent, the Mirror, you just need to find out who the news ed is, honestly, and then I think something will come up, and you can slowly build that up. And
like when you were at the Sun, like you wrote articles, like I was basically going through like loads of pages on articles that you did, and honestly, like I couldn't really even do the maths at the time to see how many you did, but I think it was like in the hundreds or so in those 6 months. But the categories of the articles were all like pretty like different. So like there was politics there was travel, there was Euro 2024. Like How do you like adapt your writing to fit the different category that you're writing for?
Comes when you're in news, it's very formulaic, and it's the same with The Sun. It doesn't really matter what you're writing about; it follows the same formula that you kind of learn pretty early on. And the other thing is that like a lot of them aren't, like I say, you're not writing. It is harder when you're writing from scratch, especially if you're writing a Sun article, because it has this kind of really like, I guess, like extravagant way of describing things that either you're that kind of journalist or you're not, and I'm not personally.
And I think this is a decent segue into the next section, and it's a question that kind of just varies from journalist to journalist. Do you think it is better to specialize as a journalist and get that niche, or do you think it's better to generalize and become like a Swiss Army knife?
It depends really, but I think that ultimately, yes, ultimately it's better to specialize. But that's because if, let's say you want to be a correspondent, let's say that's your goal, like, yeah, like you would need at some point to find a specialism for sure. And you need to know it inside out, and you need to be like depended upon to follow everything in that. So yeah, I think if you have one early on and you know that that's your thing, like 100%. And also, like I was saying to you earlier, like that often that's a good way into journalism, because you can offer something that is more than just, you know, being able to write and knowing the basics of how to write, or, you know, the mediums that we use. And also I suppose the other thing is that like really the mediums that we use, like whether that's writing or producing TV, radio, whatever you're doing, like that's actually like a 5% of the role. Like what makes you as a journalist, what's ever going to set you apart from anyone else is the content and what you're coming up with and what you're finding, the stories. Like we're doing it for the stories, and the mediums is just like they're just the tools really. So like, yeah, like you need to know how to do those, of course, but that's not your job as such. Like that's a little, yeah.
Yeah, of course. And okay, now we've spoken about like the other roles you've held in the past, but now it's time to talk BBC. So you alluded to it in the intro a little bit, but like, what is your day to day? So like, let's say tomorrow, what do you plan on doing as a BBC journalist?
Tomorrow I'm on planning.
Okay.
So I'm an item producer, which means I produce the stories that go out on the 6 and 10, and then I also do planning shifts, which is where you plan stories in advance for the week coming. Could be the next day, could be the week coming, could be a couple of months.
Yeah.
Just setting stuff up, you're researching. I guess one thing to address here is probably like that a lot of people don't know, and I don't actually think I knew this properly until I was doing it. Yeah. Which is like, what is a producer? Like, what do they actually do?
Yeah, of course.
It's such a huge umbrella term.
Yeah.
And for me, in my particular case, it's like I will pick up the rest of the things that the reporter may need to complete their TV package. So that could be like graphics, or that could be responses from, a council or something. It could be another voice. It could be a Zoom interview. So I'm just kind of, by the time the story really reaches me, it's kind of at the tail end. And I'm just putting it together so that we have it to go out on air. So then I will put it into the running order. If it's like, if we need a shorter version for lunch, then I will like cut that.
Yeah.
If we want to do an on-set then I will cut pictures to sit behind the guests to speak to.
Of course.
Or I will cut a short bit of interview that they can refer back to. So you're just kind of like finishing off the production so that it's right for the programme. Mm-hmm. I would say it's actually a little bit further removed from the actual story, possibly because you reach it at the tail end compared to obviously if you're a reporter, or if you're working online, for example. Like when you're working online, you're a lot closer to the story. Or if you're doing planning, which is you're at the beginning of the story.
Like I only understood what a producer was very recently.
Like I guess the definition of a producer is like they put the program together, but that still doesn't really tell you like what they're doing. And I suppose the other thing to mention is that like that will be actually extremely different depending on what you're working on. So for example, if you're a producer on A House in the Sun, Home or Away, you're basically an estate agent. Do you know what I mean? Like you're finding houses to put together and asking if you can film there. And like, for example, when I was working at Rip of Britain, I was finding stories of people that had been scammed. So actually, and all of these things actually required really, really different skills. So, and if you're obviously a producer for films, for fiction, that's a completely different ballgame as well. Completely different skill set, completely different everything. So I think just that's, like the term is like so broad, and you're only really going to know like what your day-to-day is when you're doing it all, like when you have a good idea of what the program is basically.
Yeah, of course. Like, was there any like a cool moment like working as a producer that sticks with you as well? Like you're like, because I understand that it could feel like a little bit like admin a little bit. But like,
Yeah.
is there any time that you've been like, oh, I set that up?
I would say not really, to be honest. I'd say that the funnest part about my job is finding the stories, and when you see your story go, like, you know, if I like produce and report on my own story, that's why I'm doing the job. I think that's the most rewarding. I think that's why everyone is doing it. That's what we all care about the most. I would say that producing a live show is pretty stressful most of the time. You're just trying to make sure that everything like comes together, and there are lots of things that can go wrong in live television, and people get very stressed out about it.
Yeah, of course. Has there been any like tough moments that you had to be like, oof, like I'm actually a little bit in the lurch right now?
Oh God, all the time. Literally, not so much in this particular role actually, because everyone is very experienced and very calm, and the program editors are amazing, and you know, the culture is really great. But there have been moments on other live shows that I've worked on where like guests have gone missing. Ooh. Literally like moments before going on air, and you know, if I'm meant to be in charge of them and I don't know where they are, it's just, you know, you feel like the world's collapsing. There was this one guest who went missing, I think when I was on Rip Off Britain, and I just could not find them for the life of me. I thought it must be in the toilet, like where are they? I don't know. And then like I found out they were having a vape in the loading bay. Oh, and it was literally like one of those, like I was literally like, you're literally on air in 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. And grabbing them, and like bless him, like he was like an elderly, well not elderly, but like not a young man. Mm-hmm. And I like was almost dragging him through the green like to get on air. And I felt I was trying to be respectful and polite.
Yeah,
like,
no, definitely.
But it was almost like he wasn't understanding the urgency. Like,
of course.
Yeah.
You don't want to be dragging this old man, but like at the same time, you know what you have to do as your job. Like, that sort of job. Like, have you ever like because obviously you're working on TV at the moment. Have you ever had like any thoughts like being on the other side, like being on air? Have you been on air?
I have, yeah. For situations like that when you've got your story, and then like basically everyone in the newsroom, this is how it works. Everyone in the newsroom has a role that they do day to day. So you could be an online reporter, you could be a planning producer, you could be an item producer like me, you could be a presenter. And that's what everyone does day to day. And then like if you have a good story, a good exclusive, good original, whatever, you're given the space to do it basically, like write, research it, go and film it. And so for example, let's say one of our presenters has a story, then like she will go and do her video, her clip, her VT, and then that will also go, you know. And same with me, like if I have a story, like I will do that, and then I will also write it, and then like it will also go, you know, my package will go on TV as well. And that could be this, like that could be the same for anyone in the newsroom essentially. Like and we want that from people, because we want people to come up with original ideas that give it, you know, that make it interesting. But there obviously are people whose job it is literally to be a TV reporter, so they will be given the on-the-day stories. Yeah. Just assigned it as they come in, kind of thing.
Of course, yeah. That sounds pretty cool. That sounds
it's a good deal. To be honest, it's a good deal. And the other thing is that like you don't always have like really good ideas. This is the other thing. Like it's okay not to have some ideas for a while, and that's fine. And you can just get on and do your job role, you know, and. That's like, I don't see any problem with that. Like I sometimes felt at The Sun, because they're like a very hungry publication, let's say.
Yeah, of course.
That it was sometimes very stressful, because it was like, right, okay, well, what are your ideas? Like, almost expecting you to come up with a fantastic exclusive every week. And it was hard because I was racking my brains. And I want to do that too, of course, that's the fun part, but sometimes it just doesn't happen, right? You know, like we're not, you know, sometimes you go home and you just want to think about watching Married at First Sight or something, and you don't always want to be thinking about what the next exclusive is. Yeah. Because it's a job as well.
Of course.
We're passionate about it and we love it, and that's why I think everyone does it to some degree. But it's still a job, and sometimes you're not in the mood to, or sometimes you just don't have this like groundbreaking exclusive. So
a some question that I have to ask you: when it comes to like personal politics, how do you keep them out of your reporting, or how does that like get into your thought process when you're picking places to work?
Like I say, it's a job. You've got to put food on the table.
Yeah,
you know, you've got to pay your rent, and it was an opportunity that was given to me. And I was unsure. I was really unsure. And actually, I remember really distinctly, I had a friend. I remember I put on my Instagram story. It was the first story I did at The Sun. I think that I had my own byline for, and it was a story about a ruin, or a sort of Roman engraving of a penis had been found on a rock while they were digging up a motorway to build it. And I put this in my story, like, oh, haha, you know, this is my first byline. And one of my friends like blocked me and blocked me on everything, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I think I texted him and I was like, what's that about? And he said, well, I just can't be saying that. I just can't be saying any kind of like Sun content now that you work there. And I was just like, and I get it.
Yeah.
But I was just kind of like, I was like, do you not understand that like I don't actually always have a say in this?
Yeah,
I have to take opportunities where they come. And that, and it was a pay rise, it was a step forward, it was what was offered to me then. Was it my dream job? No. But like, it was experience.
Of course. And so back to the BBC now.
Yeah.
And well, this is a nice segue. Like the first time you were live on air for the BBC.
It wasn't live, but it was a pre-rec.
Like, and correct me if I'm wrong, was during the King's coronation.
Oh yeah, that's true. Sorry, I was live on air then. That was a radio piece. Yeah.
Yeah, like how did you go about like finding that piece and like and how was it like being on air for the first time in your new role?
I didn't find it as such. I just told the radio newsroom, the radio part, that I wanted to work the coronation. That really.
No, of course.
And then I actually went back to my old patch, which is Romford, because I knew that they had a really strong monarchy following. There were a lot of like really fervent royalists there, so I knew that we'd get some good comments and stuff.
Yeah.
It was pretty nerve-wracking, to be fair. I think I have this tendency to garble when I'm like nervous. I think it's funny, people always fit into, I think, one of two categories when they're nervous. They either go mute or they garble, like word vomit. Yeah. And I'm of the word vomit category, and I think I spoke a million miles an hour. I think I still do speak very fast, but I remember thinking that. And then I think she actually asked me a question that I didn't know the answer to, and I just kind of averted it, and I don't know, it was nerve-wracking. Even now, like I still find it a bit nerve-wracking. I've stopped writing scripts now. I've realised that that's not the thing to do.
Yeah.
But for the first few times I was on the radio, I would plan every answer, and then read it from a script. And I soon realised that like you can tell.
Another story that stuck out to me was when you interviewed a cab driver after the general election. So do you think that journalists have like that innate ability to find the story wherever they are, or does it just come with experience?
I think it's both of those things for sure. I mean, I think what's probably very important is that you are interested in people and in the content that you're looking for. Because if you're interested in it, it will come to you naturally, for sure. So, and I think what comes with experience is more realising that this is in a story that will resonate, or this is a nugget of information, let's say, that will resonate with people, and that takes time, I think.
Yeah.
So I think, I actually often, even now, like I can often just be reading things or listening to someone and you've not quite got your brain clocked in, and it's only after you've thought about it that you're like, actually, hang on, that's a really important line. That's a strong line. That's really good.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's always instant, but I think generally speaking, if you're interested, you will find it. And with that particular case, he was just a really good talker. I think what was interesting about him is that he was voting Reform, and it was the first time that he had decided to vote Reform, and he was almost slightly like a South East London stereotypical cab driver. But he was actually very thought out, and he had his reasons to wanting to vote Reform. I think that's why it interested me, because I was like, he's not just kind of blaring out, like he has valid reasons.
Yeah.
And so that's why I picked it up, and I was like, oh, this is cool. But yeah, you're right, in sense of like, I was just on the way home from the election count, and I was really tired, and it was 8 a.m. or something like that. But I think probably because I'd been working on this all day, like all night, I was quite, my ears were up, I was pricked, I was ready for top lines and stuff like that. But I've definitely had it before where I'm like totally glazed over, and then it's like a couple of days and I'm like, oh yeah,
I liked how I liked the byline looked on the live blog. It was Adriana reporting from the back of the black cab.
That's like, often you see the byline and you think that's all someone's work, and this is important to remember, especially if you are a producer actually, that it's so collaborative that often like I took a picture of this cab driver and obviously with consent, and through my colleagues a bunch of quotes, and my colleague was doing this live page, and what you saw there was this like quite kind of like funny put together like posts that he had done, and that was him just knowing me, and like he knows what my voice kind of sounds like, and all I'd done was throw some quotes on him, and he had created this, and it was great. I saw it and I thought, oh, that's really funny, he really nailed it, kind of thing. But yeah, like I say, especially with these kinds of, like, you're out on the road, whatever, like these are always really collaborative. So yeah, it's definitely like journalism is not a one-man band at all.
So going on from how like journalism isn't like a one-man band and there's that collaborative element to it, like how do you feel like it is working in the industry now compared to when you first started?
So in terms of what the job actually entails, I think that you start off often, like, people see this career as quite prestigious, they see it as quite analytical, I guess you could say academic, but I think it's important to know that it's kind of none of those things, really. It's actually very simple. Like, your job is essentially poking about, that's what you're doing. Yeah, of course, background knowledge is important and you should be read up on things, for sure, you should follow the news, you should always helps to read a bit of history, have a niche, whatever.
Yeah.
But the job is not prescriptive. Like, you can't be told what to do. Everything as a journalist comes from within. It's a creative pursuit. It's vocational. Like, yeah, you need to know how to write, but as I said to you before, like, those are just kind of like the 5% tools that you need to know how to tell your stories.
Yeah.
It's really about, and this is the thing, because it comes from within and because it's creative, like I say, you can have weeks or months where you're on fire and you've got all of these ideas and you're coming out and you've got all these great exclusives, but you can also have times when you're just not at all, and it's very up and down. Your work life is very up and down, and that's fine, of course. It's the same with any creative pursuit. You could be a ceramicist and you can make lots of beautiful pots that are stunning because you've had a brainwave, and then you can have times when it's not. The same with an artist, same with anything, it is a creative pursuit. So, like, expecting things to come to you is not the journalist role. Nothing is going to come to you. No one's going to give you the answers, let alone the questions. You've got to go out and find those questions. Like, the classroom environment, the academic environment that people maybe think is a good beginning for a journalist isn't. The best thing you can do is go around and ask everyone questions about everything. Like, I think that's probably the one thing that most journalists all have in common, is that they're going to fire questions at you. It doesn't matter if you're at a drinks party or you're standing in line to get on the bus or whatever. That's the one thing that they have in common. Yeah. So I think if we could almost like encourage early journalists, budding journalists, to think about that and to think that stop waiting for people to teach you how to do things and to teach you how. It's just not. It's got to come from within. It's yourself, it's your interests, it's whatever draws you to anything. Like, that's what it is.
I was thinking about it literally right before we started recording. And like the more podcast episodes I do, it kind of becomes even more relevant that like whenever going for drinks with mates from uni or that sort of thing, like when I'm asking them questions, sometimes I feel like it's a bit more journalistic in how it is. So like I'm thinking about follow-ups, and even after a couple of drinks, it's still in my mind to just start firing questions. And sometimes I'm just like, oh, Plam, you're literally out with your mates right now.
Give it a rest.
Can you turn that version of yourself up? What is this?
Journalists tend to have a common interest, which is people, and if you're interested in people, you ask them questions. Yeah. And I think that remains true. It doesn't remain true for every kind of journalist. Like if you're a oil reporter for Bloomberg, maybe that's not really your domain.
Yeah.
But and that's a really important thing to say, that journalism is a really, really broad church.
Yeah.
So like the kind of skills that said oil reporter at Bloomberg would have are wildly different to someone who's a features writer for The Mirror.
Yeah.
These are two very, very different people.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I suppose the commonality is that they're going to be asking some kind of questions in some respect to something or body or person. And I'm horrifically infamous for going and interrogating people, and I have a bad reputation with all of my friends for asking often questions which they deem to be too personal or something like that. And I also if I go on dates, I sometimes just switch into reporter mode as well, where I'm pelting questions at this poor unsuspecting man kind of thing. To be honest, I actually think that's a bad thing. I think sometimes you need to let people. I think there was I can't remember who it was. One journalist, someone famous, I don't know, Piers Morgan or Jeremy Paxman, one of those, says actually sometimes the best thing to do as a journalist isn't to just pelt them with questions, but almost let there be an awkward silence, because they will fill the silence, and then you can get some really good things because
Yeah,
you want them
yeah.
to talk essentially. Like
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So that's an interesting take, I guess. Questions is definitely at the heart of everything we do, I think.
It's like that whole thing as if you're going to be a journalist, like the best skill that you could have is like being a good listener. Like if you're a good listener, I like to think you can go quite a long way in the industry.
Oh God, yeah. And I think that's really important. Like journalists who are very bubbly and gregarious and talkative and charismatic do well for sure.
Yeah.
Especially in the like presentation kind of roles. Like
Yeah.
I would definitely say those personality types are really evident in the presenting roles, you know.
Yeah.
But really you need to be listening is way more important. Like if you're not a naturally loud and bubbly person, I don't actually think I am, to be honest, that much so either. I don't think that's a requirement at all. Like it's way more important that you can listen to people, really engage, than like be charismatic as yourself for sure.
Later on, like in like the last bit of the podcast as well, like I will ask you a question like that kind of talks about that point even a little bit further.
Okay, sure.
I'll be interested to hear what you say. But the next one I have is so from the outside looking in, journalism seems like it can take up every single semblance of your life. So like how do you keep a healthy work-life balance?
Yeah, I mean, there's been times in my life when it's not been healthy, and I think that was more because of my situation. I think it depends what kind of person you are, like, and it's on you to work that out, to be honest. I think know your limits and know your boundaries and make those clear. I don't think where I work at the moment is not a really it's high pressure, I suppose, at some points, but it's not like I don't work over hours. Like our program goes out at 6:30, I go home every day. Where I work, I'm lucky that if I want those hours back, there's never a problem. It's expected that you would put them in and reclaim it, have your due days. I think it's just like what you want to put into it. Like, you know, if you want, for me now in this point in my career, having a very like distinct work-life balance is really important to me.
Yeah. Like,
you know, I've done a lot of night shifts. I've worked a lot of crazy hours. I want to have a nice life now. I want to be able to see my friends. I want to eat a balanced diet and be healthy and get a good night's sleep, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's really important to me.
Yeah,
That's important to me right now as it is my own career. And I want to, and if that means that I'm achieving a little bit less on the fact that, you know, that's the case, then so be it. But I don't actually think that is the case anyway. I think that like there is definitely such thing as working efficiently instead of working like more.
Yeah.
You can actually get a lot done in your work day for sure. If you like, sometimes for example, with me, like our mornings are quite chilled out because it's sort of the time when stories are being assigned, and you know, and that's actually a really good moment to kind of to follow up with the stories that I have going on in the background.
Yeah.
You know, just fire out these emails, reply to them, get those stats, whatever you need. Mm-hmm. Like that's a good time to do that. You can do a lot, and I work 10 hours a day, 4 days a week, and you can get a lot done in 10 hours if you want to.
Yeah.
Like I don't think there should be a need really. And maybe an odd phone call here and there, whatever.
Yeah,
but like, I don't think there's a need to work outside of my hours, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay, nice. All right. So I think at this point we've spoken about your career, your current role, trials, tribulations, the lot. But I think now it's time to go into the not so fast and furious round. So the first one, Adriana, is: are you an extrovert or an introvert?
I am 60% extrovert, 40% introvert.
Okay, nice. I get that. I understand that. Yeah.
I think that means. Oh, sorry, it's a quick round, isn't it?
It's all right. Yeah. Tell. Yeah. Good.
I think it means that like I'm generally like. I'm like borderline ambivert. I'm very happy and I get energy off people, I suppose. That's the classic definition, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I also really enjoy my own time.
Yeah, of course.
And yeah, need people to survive, but really like to do my own thing as well.
Are you a night owl or an early riser?
I am the biggest night owl in the entire world. I'm nocturnal. It's very annoying. I get all of these fantastic ideas bubbling away in my head at like 11 p.m. when I'm meant to be going to bed. It's annoying, yeah. Not great mornings.
It's the way that it goes.
Yeah.
Who would be your dream interview if you haven't interviewed them already?
Maybe J.K. Rowling, to be fair.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, because obviously she's extremely controversial and I would like to have a conversation with her because I actually don't think she like means as badly as she comes across sometimes.
And let's say after this podcast recording, you are basically taking the train or driving to go and meet J.K. Rowling. Are you listening to a podcast? Are you putting some music on? What are you doing to psych yourself up?
In that particular scenario, I'd probably just be like making sure I've got my facts together.
Yeah, not fair.
Especially with someone like with like J.K. Rowling, who has a lot of oomph, and I'm sure would be keen to catch me out as well. I'd be revising her big time. But if I wasn't and I was feeling extremely relaxed, I'd just be reading my book, I think. So yeah.
And what are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading a book called Drive Over My Bones or something like that. I can't actually remember the title now. It's a Polish author called Olga Tokarczuk. I probably said that wrong.
Okay, so next question. What TV show are you currently watching?
Married at First Sight.
Married at First Sight.
Sorry, I wish I had a more insightful answer.
No, that's completely valid. Favorite holiday destination you've been to?
I have to say Cuba.
Cuba, nice.
Yeah, it's just not like anywhere else I've been really, so yeah, just because it's sort of stuck in the past really.
Yeah.
And it's very beautiful, the culture's so vibrant, fun, it's just very disconnected from everything, there's no adverts.
Yeah.
There's no adverts at all.
Oh, okay.
So
that's what in the that's okay. That's
like
pretty
you
cool.
just don't see adverts.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Okay.
Which is actually surprising the impact that can have on you when you realise suddenly that you've not bought anything for
No,
a really long time. I actually went there for 6 months, so when I was at uni, so that's why I remember distinctly being like the impact of adverts.
Yeah, no, for sure, sure.
It's really unique and like it's really beautiful and
Okay.
just an interesting place politically.
Yeah, like okay, right there. That's a great advert for Cuba. I have to do some research. Favorite movie? Yeah.
My favourite movie at the moment is Poor Things that came out recently.
The one with Emma Stone.
Yes.
Yes. That's a good
Have
film.
you seen it?
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it. Admittedly, at first watch, I didn't know what I was getting into.
Okay.
Yeah, I really didn't. But I thought it was a good film.
I thought it was kind of like as if a millennial, like feminist Salvador Dali had directed a film.
Yeah.
That's how I describe it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I just thought it was enthralling. Like I was so, wow, yeah, I thought it was incredible.
Yeah.
But before that, my favorite so that's a recent change. And before that, my favorite film was City of God for like ages. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, I've seen
I
City
love
of
that
God.
film so much.
Like that film is amazing.
Yeah.
And okay, my last question is, like, one word to describe your career as of right now. First word that pops into your mind.
One word.
One word.
Oh, I don't know. Okay.
Okay. You sure want to go with okay before I do the outro?
What?
You want okay?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. And with that, thank you, Adriana, for coming onto the podcast. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the How to Be a Journalist podcast. I've been Plamedi Mbungu, signing out.